Hello, welcome back. Today I am bringing you my March reading wrap-up. The first book I read in March was Animal by Sara Pascoe. This is a non-fiction, half kind of memoir and half kind of factual book, and it takes a kind of scientific approach towards sexuality, why humans want to have sex, what are the reasons behind all the social constructs that we've created around sex. Sara Pascoe is a British comedian. She's a stand-up comedian and she also does heaps of the British panel shows. And she talks a lot about sexuality and sex and gender and that kind of thing in her stand-up. I kind of had an idea of what the book would be like, but it was way more sciencey and factual than I thought it was going to be. Sara's obviously done heaps and heaps of research from a variety of books, and she lists all the books that she recommends for further reading at the back. So she's collated all this research and she's put it together in a really accessible, really funny, also really moving sort of memoir style. So for someone like me who is not very scientifically minded in that I have a lot of trouble understanding scientific words, it's really accessible. So in the book, Sara tries to find out whether there are scientific reasons and evolutionary reasons behind the things that we think of as emotional responses, such as love and lust and that kind of thing. A book like that could very easily get heteronormative, and what's really great is Sara always makes sure that she recognizes that she's generalizing, recognizes that although she's talking for the most part about heterosexual relationships, makes sure to recognize that of course there are gay people, bisexual people, asexual people, and all kinds of people on a spectrum. Amongst the scientific aspects of the book, she puts in a lot of her own experiences, and she writes in a really colloquial way. It really feels like a friend writing to you. She even mentions bits in the book about where she's writing from, so she'll occasionally say, oh, I'm writing from a cafe right now, so I'm not gonna Google this thing on the cafe's internet, that kind of thing, which makes it really personable. I really enjoyed this book. This is a library copy. I'm considering buying a copy because I think it's definitely something that I would reread chapters of, and I really wish I had had a book like this when I was a lot younger, because I think it's one of those books that when you're like 15, 16, it could really change your life almost, like make you feel so much better about the like scary teenage stuff that's going on. Sara's also a vegan, and if you've never seen her stand up, I definitely recommend googling it and also reading this book. The second book I read in March was Stoner by John Williams, not the John Williams who wrote the theme music for Star Wars. This is one of the ones I picked up from the market down in Dunsborough. It was only $2, and I'm really glad it was only $2 because this is not worth anyone's time. The title is misleading. It is not about a druggie. It is about a man called John Stoner. He grows up in America on a farm in the late 1800s. His father decides to send him to university to study agriculture so he can improve the farm and make it more profitable for them. He goes to uni, and then he has to do a compulsory literary course, and he gets blown away by books and literature and decides to devote his life to that instead. So the book follows his entire life. It starts off at the beginning describing everything that happens in his life and saying that people don't really remember who he is. If you were to ask his students to talk about John Stoner, they would say he was like a nice enough person but not really memorable. So that's the gist of it, and not really a great start to a book, to be honest. But anyway, you read on, and sort of the book is about how despite appearances, despite someone having what seems to be a really mundane life, they can have an immense internal life that no one else ever sees. So he does experience things really deeply. He has this love of literature and he becomes a professor, but he finds it really hard to demonstrate this love to his students. So he gets really frustrated about that. He goes through 2 wars but he never actually fights in any of them. He manages to get out of that. He gets married to a person within like a month of meeting her. They're not happy. In fact, she's like made out to be this crazy character, and that's the bit where I started to really be annoyed by this book. The writing itself is nice enough that I was going along with it thinking, okay, this might be alright, but then the character of his wife kind of goes from this kind of mysterious lady whose parents have always really sheltered her, to like crazy person who just refuses to let Jon Stoner touch her and gets super controlling, and when they finally have a daughter she's super controlling of the daughter, and it's just like we never really find out why she's like that. And there is a bit in the book where he basically has his way with her, is that a nice way of putting it? Marital rape basically, and in the book it's kind of brushed over because I guess at the time they were like, oh well, she's his wife, she should do that for him, but she didn't want to, and it was just super gross. Like, I'm happy enough to read a book where not a lot happens, but this kind of took that concept too far and it just got super repetitive by the end, and I just really didn't care what happened to this character, so I would not recommend. Third book I reread this in March, was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. So I first read this when I was about, I'd say 18 or 19. Obviously I thought it was incredible when I first read it. The first time I read it, I think I read it quite fast because I just really wanted to know what happened. I was kind of mostly intrigued by the mystery and the story and the way that the narrator, the main character, slowly reveals what happens to her and slowly reveals the world. And so reading it a second time was really interesting because I definitely picked up on way more of the nuances of the story. Margaret Atwood always says that all her dystopian novels are based on things that have actually happened somewhere in the world, and that includes The Handmaid's Tale. She says that everything in this book has appeared in some form in the real life, and I think that's what makes it like hit home so hard. The thing I found really interesting reading it is that it almost didn't seem that foreign. Like on the surface, the way the world functions in this book and the horrific things that are done to women are awful, but because it is so linked to things that have happened in the past and still so linked to the way our society views roles of gender, it almost feels, it doesn't feel correct, but it feels familiar, and that's really scary. I reread this because the TV series is coming out soon. I'm really curious to see how they adapt it because the book is so much in the main character's perspective. If you haven't read this, I would definitely recommend reading it before you see the TV series because I think it is really good going in not really knowing a lot about it or not knowing the details. The fourth book I read in March was Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. I read this book because our national radio, called Radio National, has a books and arts program, and they do a book club each month, and this year the book club theme is South American books, and so this was the book for this month. This book is divided into 12 chapters, one for each month of the year, and each chapter starts with a recipe. So can you see that? It gives the name of the recipe and lists the ingredients, and then throughout the chapter it includes instructions to the recipe really melded into the narrative, which sounds a bit gimmicky, but I think it really worked because food is such an integral part of the plot of this book. So this is very much magical realism. It is about a lady called Tita. She is the youngest daughter in a family, and the mum is keeping up this awful tradition where the youngest daughter is not allowed to go marry anyone. She has to stay at home and look after her mum until her mum dies. But Tita wants to marry this guy called Pedro. Her mum won't let her. However, they arrange with Pedro's family that he will marry her older sister Rosora. Tita gets kind of upset about this, but Pedro tells her that he just agreed to this so he could be closer to her. And lots of drama ensues. So Tita is an amazing cook, and a lot of the magical realism happens through her cooking. There's a scene where she's making the wedding cake for her sister and her ex-boyfriend's wedding, and she's crying heaps, so she cries into the wedding cake, and then all of the wedding guests that eat the cake end up crying as well. And so lots of different things happen like that. So a lot of her meals cause these kind of like strange things to happen, which kind of move the story forward. Normally I find magical realism a little bit gimmicky. I often find it can just kind of like smooth over plot points that are just a bit dodgy, but in this book it really works. I think maybe it is because everyone is all very sort of heated in their emotions, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's also it's set during the time of the Mexican Revolution, so that's going on as well. So it seemed to kind of suit the tone of the book. I really enjoyed the writing. It had a kind of fairy tale quality to it, which I really liked. Tita, the main character, she is, despite having this sort of passionate love for this guy Pedro, even though he has absolutely no character, she is mostly really sensible, and her reactions to things sort of made me laugh, because perhaps it's because the way this book's advertised is kind of like this amazing love story, and that bit of the story didn't interest me because it didn't seem very real. They just had this lust for each other that was like unexplainable, and I just find that really unbelievable. But all the other bits, they're just sort of the sensible cooking bits and the practical stuff that she talks about throughout the book. I just thought really made her an interesting character to read. I guess the only thing that really put me off this book was there is a lot of talk of dead animals. I've just never eaten animals, so the idea of them tasting good is just foreign to me, so that bit of the story I just found a bit gross. When it came out, this was a huge bestseller in Mexico, and when the English translation came out, it was also really popular. There was a movie made of it, as you can see from the front cover. It was definitely a fun read. So that is all the books I read in March. Please let me know in the comments if you've read any of them and have any opinions on them. I love talking with you guys in the comments. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you soon. Bye!